Good morning. First, I want to say thank you for having me here today to talk about our waterfront. It is, I think, the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning and gives me energy and makes me happy to go to work. It's a great job and one that I think anybody could envy. I want to start today, what we're going to do is just give you a brief overview of the waterway. I know most of you are very familiar with it. And then I'm going to spend the bulk of the presentation talking about a feasibility study that we've had done to look at this next round of sites that we want to take out to development that moves us further north down the waterway. So we'll do the overview, then I'm going to talk about the North Foss development, kind of some redevelopment scenarios that we did under our study, and kind of the key takeaways that we got from that. But I think it's always good to take a quick look back at what we used to be. And I know when I started that this area that I'm showing now, which is down near Albers Mill, was not only was the water contaminated, but many people forgot that this was the area where there were a lot of drug needles, undesirable uses. There were a couple of old refrigerators on the shoreline, construction debris. And this is kind of what we looked like before we actually started construction. Today, this is that same area. This is a night shot of the Martin Blank sculpture that's in there by the Museum of Glass. You can see Albers Mill in the distance. And today, our waterway is the premier South Sound boating destination. And our new apartment building, the Henry, just opened their first tower and the first residents are moving in. The project will be completed here in about the next 6 weeks. So looking at our master concept plan here, you can kind of see that the properties south of 15th, which is about from here going this direction, that we had pretty large development pads. They were about 300 feet wide and about 200 feet deep. And prior to marketing them, the remediation of the land had taken place, upgraded utilities to support the development were on the street side, and the public esplanade was in. But as we move north, circumstances have changed. So as we go to the north, what we have and what we looked at were two sites that we've got that are just sit to the south of the 11th Street Bridge. We call them sites 8 and 9. And on these sites, we happen to have the upgraded utilities in the street, but the land hasn't been remediated, and we used to have machine shops, foundries, and the old Tacoma steam plant in that area. And only a portion of the esplanade is actually in. So we have a different situation. We don't have pad-ready sites to market. And my board wanted to know, in the Tacoma market, if we put this kind of product out, what is it we're likely to get back? What's going to be viable development? Let's look at it through the lens of the private investor. So here's a shot of those properties. The one on your left is what we call Site 9. Right now it's a parking lot that's used to support the marina that's out front of it. And then on the right you will see the old Sea Scout building. That's vacant right now. Unfortunately, it's structurally not in the condition that can be occupied. So we're starting with some contamination. We knew that the cost to remediate it, dig down, put a below grade garage like we did at the properties on the south end, would probably cost about twice what the assessed value of the land is. So we knew we were a little upside down there. So we wanted to look at what are some of the alternatives. So we have these challenges: environmental contamination. There's a high water table, so it restricts how far down you can go. The sites were narrow. Regulations had changed. It actually tightened up, so we had more regulatory issues. Parking to support development has always been a challenge down on the waterfront, and certainly that was going to continue with these sites. And the esplanade wasn't complete. But we've got some advantages down there too. First of all, it's waterfront property. And you know, that makes it very, very special. The other thing, the upgraded utilities are in the street, so that's a cost that the private investor wouldn't have to bear. We'd also managed to quantify the environmental conditions, what was there, what it would cost to remediate, and we had in places different alternatives for remediation, some of them which would help lower costs. The other thing is that these couple of sites have great connections to downtown. They're right next to the 11th Street Bridge that has been rehabbed, has a great staircase, an elevator, and it takes you right into the downtown core. The other thing is there's really easy access to a variety of commuter options from these sites. If you're on foot or on bicycle, you can go up that elevator right into downtown. You can connect to the link that's going to, very soon we hope, take you up to the medical mile. It will also take you over to the Dome District where you can access the Sounder and the bus system that goes throughout Pierce County. Or if you're going by car, you can go up 15th or 4th off of Dock Street, and in 2 minutes you're on 705 and connecting to the I-5 corridor. So great location in terms of ease of access for commuting. So we knew from what we had done very briefly that we had physical and zoning constraints around these sites, and that was probably going to be what was going to inform the type of development we were likely to get. So my board asked the consultants to take a look at these sites and say, are we better off marketing these separately as two separate sites? Or are they going to have a greater value if we put the two sites together into one? We also wanted to know what kind of a buildable area would we have if we applied all of the existing code constraints versus what are we likely to have if we're willing to seek some variances on certain code items that might help incent better quality development. And we had the consultants look at office, multifamily, hospitality, and for sale products. And then we asked them to run scenarios on low-rise, mid-rise, and high-rise development. We can build up to 130 feet tall in this part of the waterfront, but given the narrow sites, is that really practical, and is it financially feasible to put a product that would be 130 feet tall on these narrow sites? And that's part of the question we wanted the consultant to answer for us. So here's what we did. This is when you look at the two sites separately and you applied all the code constraints. We said, well, what kind of a buildable area do we end up with? We had a couple 100 feet wide, but the depth only ran 36 to 47 feet deep. So these are very narrow. Some of you might even have a house that's 36 feet deep. But for commercial development and higher density like we see on the south end, this gets pretty tough with these kinds of numbers. So we said, well, what's it look like if we put the sites together and take these access corridors we've got between, relocate them, and do some variances on the code? Then what's our building footprint look like? And that's what it looks like. And this then expanded it up to, we now have a depth somewhere between 70 to about 89 feet in depth. Much improved, but one of the things that we found from this is it really is going to limit the parking capability on the site. And you know, the city's doing great work about making more walkable communities, and that's something that I think everybody should embrace. But I think the market reality is that people still own cars, even if they are using more alternative transportations. Let me ask a question for those of you in the room. Raise your hand if you don't own a car. Okay.
I have a truck.
Well, we'll count it is okay. Raise your hand if you don't have a vehicle, right? Then here's my other question to you. Would you rent an apartment or buy a condo if you did not have a parking space for your vehicle? All of you that would do that?
No.
None. So even though we're building more walkable communities and we're trying to go the direction where we get people out of their cars, cars are still part of everyday life. So the marketing reality is you still have to accommodate parking if you're going to have successful development. So what we did is we had them look at the three models: high-rise, mid-rise, and low-density. And we found out pretty quickly that the high-rise, looking at something like the State Farm Building, that 130 feet height we had simply wasn't going to be feasible development. Our mid-rise, we either ended up not feasible or near feasibility. And mid-rise, the new Henry building that's going up on the south end, that's an example of mid-rise, so you get a chance to kind of imagine the scale. Low density, however, came in near feasible or feasible, kind of depending on the unit size, the type, and the configuration on the site. So here's some of the things we looked at. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I want to give you a flavor. We probably had them run at least 24 examples. And what we wanted to do is look at this from the standpoint of the private investor and what the lender might be looking for in projects. So we've all heard the term that somebody comes in and tells you something won't pencil. It's like, well, show us the numbers. You know, we want a reality check here. So on this particular instance, we looked at a mid-rise commercial development, either multifamily or office with mixed-use space, and some parking on a parking structure that would be adjacent to the building. So we had about five levels of parking and about 5 floors of residential or commercial, total of 6 levels in the parking. And then we had to run the numbers. And this came up infeasible. Now I've got Marv here, and I think Marv can probably tell you, I don't know, we have any other bankers in the room? Other bankers? Any of you in commercial lending? Okay, I think you folks normally look for what, about a 15% margin on cost?
Yeah, and that's high, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's what we were kind of targeting. And so when we ran these numbers, when you look at that statistic feasibility gap, we were looking for something around 4 million, 4.2, and we were only at 593,000. So we had a margin on cost of only about 2.1%. Chances are, even if you like this, you may not be able to get it financed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct. So we figured out pretty quickly that wasn't going to work. We said, well, what if we held the properties longer, didn't market them right now? Over time, is there any chance that this is going to become more feasible? And so we had the consultant take a look at that for us. When you look at this feasibility timeline, it looks like we're 20 years out. And that assumes that you have rents that are gradually raising over those 20 years, but that your construction and labor costs are relatively fixed. So we thought, well, this isn't where we want to go, because first of all, we don't want to wait 20 years. So we need to find some alternatives that will work. So we went back and said, well, wait a minute. What if we slap some more residential on this? Can we get better feasibility? As part of the problem here is that we just need more revenue generation off the site. Well, we ran that, and we started getting a little bit better, but now we're only at 9.1%. So this one also didn't look too good. So then we said, well, what if we get to lower density? Instead of trying to get it bigger, what if we went down again? And we looked at townhouses, 24 live-work units. Now this is pretty adventuresome because even though we've just had live-work regulation that's been going through the city council, I think just this week, it's still a a pretty much untested product in Tacoma. Not only that, but we said, well, yes, but would we want to take these properties and dedicate them to benefit only 24 units? Even if we put a restaurant pad in there to maybe drive some commercial on it, is that going to be enough to activate the area? It doesn't really need what our density goals are, but we said, let's try and figure out if this is something that's even feasible. And these are kind of the products that might be delivered, style of product to be delivered under that kind of a scenario. We wanted people to know that. And when we looked at it, now our margin on cost went up to 20%. Now I would think the bankers in the room would think, this looks like a good product to support. Kind of our what if in here is the average sale price on these would have to be about $570,000. And that's about $345 a square foot. The Esplanade condos down there on the waterfront are running about $302 a square foot. So it's higher than our market on this piece of waterfront has been in the past, but it's not as high on a per square foot as they're getting out at Point Ruston, for example. So this might be a scenario that could be considered. I think my board's concern here is that's not really in keeping with the urban density that we expected down on the waterfront and that the community identified as important during the planning process for what the vision of Foss was going to be. So then we said, well, what if we look at doing something interim and wait until the market and the density of the Tacoma can absorb higher density? What would we be looking at? Well, we might be looking at something like a parking lot. Now, not the highest and best use, but maybe if the answer is higher density comes later in our history, maybe what we should be doing on these two particular sites is looking at an interim use. So we took a look at that layout. We've got some benefits and constraints around that, of course. It has the ability to provide parking in an area where we have a parking deficit, and it's sometimes a barrier to the public being able to use the waterfront. It would avoid substantial environmental remediation. It gives us some flexibility in the future. It does not require significant capital investment at this point in time, so it's probably something you can finance. And it still has some challenges, of course. It's not what we really want for density long term. Still would probably require some zoning variances. And of course, for us, we're looking at, does it generate revenues or sales that are going to benefit the development authority, which then reinvests these on further sites. So here's kind of some of our key takeaways. Public investment may be needed to make these sites feasible for the development. All of the scenarios that we looked at, and I just showed you a few, but we ran, I think, over 24 different scenarios trying to figure out what might work. But all of them did not include the public esplanade. That may be a piece that the public sector's going to have to step up to make this site feasible for development. The lower density projects are probably the most likely north of 15th. Even though we have sites on the other side of the 11th Street Bridge that don't have the same environmental conditions, they still have that narrow profile. And we recognize that probably the physical constraints of the site are going to be what ultimately drive the density down on the northern part of the waterfront. So we're considering interim uses, might be something that we look at, but that if we did that, one of the things we want to do is preserve air rights. We don't want to abandon the vision that we have for the Foss and that this community expects, but maybe if you end up in a site that has a a parking lot for an interim use instead of a higher density, that you want to preserve the air rights so you can lit over it, whether you're doing a park or you're coming in with commercial or residential, that you retain the right to develop that with the public sector when the market dictates that it could absorb more density. And then I think the other thing is the connection to downtown is really viable and is an important part of use, and how we connect back to the city from the Foss, especially on those northern sites, is going to be important. And that frankly, until we actually go out to the market, we're not really sure what we're going to get back. You know, there could be a variety of things here that could happen. And that it's time to test the market. Tacoma, or Seattle's very hot right now. We're not Seattle. You know, the difference down here is you get $1.71 a square foot. When you're renting units, and up in Seattle, you're over $3. So we're a different market. But it's time to go out. Our market's starting to heat up, and my board feels it's time to test the waters. So we hope to be out in the month of October, and we're going to be offering these 2 sites and a couple sites on the other side, northern side of the 11th Street Bridge. And I hope that I can come back and visit Rotary again in the future and tell you what we've got coming back in. And with that, I'd be happy to open it up to questions.